Take your hands off my mother! Richard Whitmore's voice cracked across the marble foyer like a gunshot. Danielle Brooks froze on her knees beside Eleanor Whitmore, one hand supporting the elderly woman's shoulder, the other hovering inches from an open-wall safe. Cold white light spilled from inside it. An empty velvet jewelry case lay on the carpet. Richard's polished shoes struck the floor hard as he crossed the room. Step away from her. Now. Danielle slowly raised both hands. She collapsed. I heard something fall and came in. And somehow the safe opened itself? Claire Bennett stood behind him, pale and rigid in her gray house manager's uniform. She pointed toward the empty case. Mr. Whitmore, the diamond necklace is gone. Richard's eyes moved from the safe to Danielle. Something changed in them. Not concern. Judgment. I did not touch that necklace, Danielle said. Eleanor stirred weakly on the floor, trying to speak, but Richard barely looked down. Claire? I saw Danielle leaving this room earlier. Danielle turned sharply. Because your mother asked for me. Of course she did, Claire replied. The words were soft, almost polite, which somehow made them worse. Richard pulled out his phone. Danielle could hear the faint mechanical hum of the climate system above them, the ticking grandfather clock, her own heartbeat pounding against her ribs. 3 years in this house. 3 years of arriving before sunrise, remembering Eleanor's tea, staying late when her hands trembled too badly to button her sweater. None of it seemed to exist now. Richard looked at Danielle's plain black uniform, then at the safe. The conclusion appeared effortless. Empty your pockets. Danielle stared at him. Excuse me? You heard me. Heat climbed into her face. Claire folded her arms. 2 staff members had appeared at the hallway entrance, watching without speaking. Danielle felt their eyes settle on her like weight. Your mother needs a doctor, she said. This is not about me. Do not tell me what my mother needs. Richard stepped closer. Empty your pockets. Danielle reached slowly into her apron. A folded handkerchief. 2 peppermint candies Eleanor liked after dinner. A small notebook. Nothing else. Richard noticed the notebook. What is that? Danielle closed her fingers around it. Something I have been trying to show you for 2 weeks. About what? Her eyes flicked toward Eleanor. Her medication. Claire's expression tightened for half a second. Danielle saw it. Richard did not. Do not change the subject, he snapped. I am not changing anything. Your mother has been getting dizzy after her evening pills. Tonight she nearly passed out before she reached the safe. Richard gave a humorless laugh. So now you are her doctor? No. I am the person who noticed. The room went still. Richard's jaw hardened. You work in my house. You clean rooms. You do not diagnose my mother, and you certainly do not search through her belongings. Danielle rose slowly, dignity holding her upright even as humiliation burned behind her eyes. I never searched anything. People like you always have an explanation when something goes missing. Silence hit the room harder than shouting. Danielle's face changed. Not anger. Hurt. The kind that arrived when suspicion finally said out loud what it had been hiding. She looked directly at him. People like me? Richard did not answer. He did not have to. Danielle glanced at the watching staff, then back at the billionaire whose mother she had just lifted from the floor. Did your mother say I stole it? Eleanor's fingers moved weakly against the carpet. Her lips parted. No sound came. Richard looked at the empty jewelry case instead. You are fired. Danielle swallowed. Richard, Eleanor breathed, almost inaudible. He missed it. Pack your things. Leave the property before I call security. Danielle stood motionless for 1 beat, then removed the brass house key from her apron and placed it on the marble console. The tiny metallic click echoed through the foyer. She set the notebook beside it. When she wakes up, Danielle said quietly, ask her why I was really in this room. Then she walked toward the front doors. Behind her, Eleanor suddenly found enough strength to whisper one word. Medicine. Claire's hand tightened around the stair rail. Richard turned toward his mother. And on the marble table behind him, Danielle's notebook fell open to a page containing a date, a dosage, and one name Richard never expected to see. Richard stared at the open notebook. The page trembled beneath the cold chandelier light as Eleanor's breathing scraped softly behind him. 3 dates were written in Danielle's careful handwriting, each followed by the same evening dosage, the same dizzy spell, the same time. Then came the name at the bottom, Dr. Marcus Hale. Richard's private physician. The man he had trusted with his mother for 11 years. "What is this?" Richard whispered. Claire stepped closer, her heels clicking against marble. "Probably something she copied to make herself look useful." Richard glanced at her. Too fast. Too certain. Across the foyer, the front doors closed behind Danielle with a heavy wooden thud. Outside, rain hammered the stone driveway as she walked toward the detached garage, where employees kept their coats and personal bags. Her hands were shaking now. She hated that they were shaking. Inside the garage, fluorescent lights buzzed above 2 black luxury SUVs. A ventilation fan rattled against the concrete wall. Danielle opened her locker and reached for her coat. Behind her, footsteps approached. "Claire. You should leave quietly," she said. Danielle did not turn around. "I was already leaving." "Then leave the notebook behind." Danielle's hand stopped. "Why?" Claire's expression remained smooth, but her fingers tightened around her phone. "Because Mr. Whitmore does not need household staff inventing medical theories." Danielle finally faced her. "I did not invent the pills." The garage suddenly felt smaller. Claire lowered her voice. "You have lost your job. Do not make this worse." Danielle studied her face. For 3 years, Claire had controlled schedules, keys, deliveries, staff access, even the weekly pharmacy packages delivered for Eleanor. That detail landed differently now. "You knew she was getting sick," Danielle said. Claire's eyes hardened. "Careful." Before Danielle could answer, the interior door swung open. Richard entered, the notebook clenched in his hand. His footsteps struck the concrete with controlled fury. "Danielle." She looked at him but said nothing. He held up the page. "Why is Hale's name here?" "Because every episode started after the medication he prescribed." "That is impossible." "Then check." Richard's mouth tightened. He was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone whose employment he had ended 3 minutes earlier. "You expect me to believe you discovered something my mother's doctor missed?" Danielle slipped on her coat. "No. I expected you to listen before you decided I was a thief." The words landed cleanly. Claire looked away. Richard did not. Rainwater flashed silver beyond the garage windows. "Where is the necklace?" he asked. Danielle's eyes filled with disbelief. Even now, even with his mother collapsed upstairs, he still returned to the missing diamonds. "I do not know. You were beside the safe." "Because Eleanor fell. Claire saw you there earlier." Danielle looked toward Claire. "Tell him what else you saw." Claire blinked. "I have no idea what you mean." "Tuesday night. His mother almost dropped her pill organizer in the kitchen. You were standing 10 feet away." Richard turned. "Is that true?" A beat passed. The ventilation fan hummed. Claire forced a small laugh. "Eleanor is 72. Older people get dizzy." Danielle's expression sharpened. "Not at exactly 8:45 every night." Richard looked back at the notebook. 8:45. 8:47. 8:43. His confidence began to fracture. Then his phone rang. The house line. He answered immediately. "Yes?" A staff member spoke so urgently that Richard's face drained of color. "I am coming." He ended the call and rushed toward the door, then stopped. "My mother is awake." Danielle's anger vanished beneath concern. "Is she all right?" Richard hesitated, almost ashamed that she had asked before he did. "She is asking for you." Claire went completely still. Richard noticed. Upstairs, Eleanor sat against her pillows beneath the amber bedside lamp, her face colorless but alert. Richard entered first, Danielle several steps behind. Claire remained near the doorway. Eleanor saw Danielle and released a breath of relief. Thank God. Richard sat beside her. Mom, your necklace is missing. Eleanor frowned. What necklace? Grandmother's diamonds. From the safe. Her confusion lasted only a second. Then she looked toward the carved wooden box on her nightstand. Richard, I moved it this morning. His body went rigid. Eleanor opened the box and lifted a velvet pouch. Diamonds spilled into the warm light. Richard stared at them, unable to speak. Danielle had been innocent. Completely innocent. But Eleanor was not finished. Her eyes moved toward Claire, then back to her son. You fired Danielle, did you not? Richard lowered his head. Yes. Eleanor's hand tightened around the pouch. Then you had better bring her back before you lose more than an employee. Richard looked up. What are you talking about? Eleanor pointed toward Danielle's notebook. Those pills did not start making me sick by accident. The color vanished from Claire's face. Eleanor saw it. So did Danielle. And this time, Richard saw it too. Nobody touches another pill until I know who changed them. Richard's voice cut through the bedroom, but Danielle was already moving. She crossed to Eleanor's nightstand and lifted the amber prescription bottle toward the lamp. Gold light flashed across the plastic. This is not the bottle I saw Tuesday. Claire gave a brittle laugh. You are a maid, Danielle. Not a pharmacist. Danielle rotated the bottle between steady fingers. I can read a label. Richard stepped closer, irritation returning now that the first shock had passed. Let the professionals handle this. Danielle looked at him. The professionals had 2 weeks. Silence. Richard's jaw tightened. Even after falsely accusing her, he still spoke as if authority made him right. Claire seized the opening. She has already caused enough chaos tonight. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She caused it? Richard glanced at his mother, then toward the hallway, where several staff members had gathered. A phone camera quietly clicked on. Richard noticed the glowing screen. Put that away. The phone disappeared, but the tension did not. Danielle opened her notebook on the dresser. Tuesday, 8:43. Dizziness. Thursday, 8:47. Slurred speech, then recovery. Saturday, 8:45. Same pattern. Richard scanned the entries. You recorded my mother? I recorded what everyone else ignored. Claire stepped forward. Her heels struck the hardwood sharply. Or you manufactured a story after getting caught near the safe. Danielle's eyes lifted. The necklace was never stolen. Claire stopped. A faint sheen appeared along her wrist beneath her cuff. Eleanor watched her now. Richard did too. Enough, he said. I am calling Dr. Hale. He tapped the number. Speakerphone filled the room with a soft electronic ring. Once. Twice. Then voicemail. Richard tried again. Voicemail. Strange, Danielle said. Claire snapped toward her. What is? Danielle pointed at the prescription bottle. The refill date. Richard leaned closer. Yesterday. So? Your mother told me Dr. Hale was in Boston all week. Richard's eyes shifted. He is. Danielle held up the bottle. Then who delivered a new prescription under his authorization yesterday? No one answered. The air conditioner whispered through the vent. Somewhere downstairs, a grandfather clock struck 9. Claire reached for the bottle. Give me that. Danielle pulled it back. Why? Because you have no right to handle Mrs. Whitmore's medication. Neither does whoever changed it. Claire's composure cracked. Richard, are you seriously letting an employee interrogate me in your mother's bedroom? Employee. Danielle almost smiled at the word. 10 minutes earlier, Claire had watched Richard fire her. Now she needed Danielle beneath her again. Richard extended his hand. Give me the bottle. Danielle hesitated, then placed it in his palm. Check the pharmacy number. Richard looked at the label and dialed. A recorded message answered immediately. The number was disconnected. His face changed. Claire stepped backward. 1 inch. Barely noticeable. Danielle noticed. That is not her pharmacy, Eleanor whispered. Richard stared at the bottle as though it had become something poisonous in his hand. Claire, who received the medication delivery yesterday? I do not track every package that enters this house. Danielle closed her notebook. Yes, you do. Claire's eyes flashed. Excuse me? Every medical delivery requires your signature. You made that rule after Mrs. Whitmore's heart medication was left outside last winter. Eleanor nodded slowly. She is right. Richard turned toward Claire. For the first time that night, the billionaire was looking at his house manager the way he had looked at Danielle beside the safe. Suspicious. Cold. Claire saw it and stiffened. This is absurd. She reached for her phone. Richard's voice dropped. Who are you calling? Security. Why? Claire did not answer. Danielle's gaze fell to the screen before Claire turned it away. A message notification had appeared for less than a second. Danielle had seen only 5 words, but they were enough. Richard. Something in her voice made everyone freeze. Ask Claire why Dr. Hale just texted her. Claire went pale. Richard held out his hand. Give me your phone. No. It was the first word Claire had spoken all night without control. Eleanor inhaled sharply. Richard took 1 step forward. Claire. Her phone suddenly rang. Dr. Marcus Hale flashed across the screen. Nobody moved. The vibration buzzed against her palm, loud in the silent room. Once. Twice. Claire declined the call. Then Eleanor spoke from the bed, her voice weak but terrifyingly clear. Richard, there is something else. He turned. His mother pointed toward the locked drawer beneath her nightstand. Danielle was not the first person who warned me about those pills. Richard's expression emptied. Who was? Eleanor reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in shaky black ink, were 3 words, for my son. She held it toward Richard, but her eyes remained fixed on Claire. The person who wrote this disappeared 2 weeks ago. Open it. Eleanor's sealed envelope trembled between Richard's fingers. Claire stood near the doorway, her phone clenched against her palm, while Dr. Hale's unanswered call vanished from the screen. Richard tore the envelope open. A folded note slipped out, followed by a pharmacy receipt. His eyes raced across the handwriting, then stopped. Who wrote this? Eleanor swallowed. Maria Santos. Claire's face tightened. Danielle knew the name. Maria had been Eleanor's night caregiver until 2 weeks earlier, when Claire told the staff she had quit without notice. She did not quit, Eleanor whispered. She came to me frightened. She said my pills looked different. Richard stared at his mother. Why did you not tell me? I tried. Her voice cracked. You were always in a meeting. The words landed harder than an accusation. Behind Richard, 2 employees hovered in the hallway. 1 phone camera glowed beside a sleeve. Claire noticed it. Everyone out. Now. Danielle did not move. Why are you ordering them? Claire snapped toward her. Because unlike you, I still work here. The humiliation was deliberate. Danielle absorbed it without blinking. Then tell Richard what happened to Maria. Claire's cheeks flushed. She was unreliable. She worked here 6 years. You knew her for 3. Long enough to know she would not abandon Mrs. Whitmore without saying goodbye. Richard slammed the receipt onto the dresser. Stop. His control was fraying. The billionaire who could silence a boardroom with 1 glance now stood inside his mother's bedroom while his staff whispered outside and a missing caregiver threatened to turn a family scandal into something much worse. Nobody leaves this floor, he ordered. Danielle looked at him. That is not what matters. Richard's eyes flashed. Do not tell me what matters in my own house. Your mother could have taken another dose tonight. Silence. Richard's anger collapsed for half a second. Danielle stepped toward the dresser and compared the receipt with the bottle. Cold light reflected across the metal cap. Look at the dosage. Richard leaned in. 20 milligrams? Her regular prescription is 10. Claire interrupted. You cannot know that. Danielle opened her notebook. I wrote it down from the original bottle after she nearly fainted last Thursday. You copied private medical information? Richard asked. There it was again. Suspicion finding Danielle before gratitude could. She stared at him, stunned. Your mother was getting sick. That does not give you authority. Eleanor's voice cut through the room. It gave her enough authority to keep me awake. Richard went silent. Danielle turned the receipt over. A faint indentation crossed the paper beneath the printed total. There is another number. Richard frowned. Danielle angled it beneath the lamp. Order number. She read it aloud. Claire immediately stepped forward. That proves nothing. Danielle looked at her. I did not say it did. Claire froze. Richard caught it this time. His breathing changed. Danielle pulled out her phone and called the 24-hour pharmacy printed on Maria's receipt. A technician answered. Danielle gave Eleanor's name, then handed the phone to Richard for verification. His voice was clipped, impatient. I need the dosage history. A keyboard clicked through the speaker. 10 seconds felt like a minute. Then the technician spoke. Richard's expression hardened. Repeat that. The room became perfectly still. There has been no authorized dosage increase, Richard said slowly after the call ended. Eleanor closed her eyes. Claire backed toward the hallway. Richard looked at her. Where are you going? I am getting security. Stay. One word. Claire stopped. For the first time, Richard's power was pointed away from Danielle. But Danielle was staring at something else, the pharmacy receipt. Richard, wait. She held it beside the suspicious bottle. These did not come from the same pharmacy. He frowned. How can you tell? Different prescription numbers. Different label format. Different phone number. She pointed to a tiny line near the barcode. And this bottle lists your mother's birth year wrong. Eleanor opened her eyes. Richard's face drained. Danielle had seen in seconds what everyone with titles, money, and credentials had overlooked. Then a sharp electronic tone sounded from the hallway. The mansion's security panel. Once. Twice. A male staff member looked downstairs. Mr. Whitmore, the garage door just opened. Richard turned toward Claire. Her face was white. Who has access? He demanded. No answer. Then an engine roared to life below them, vibrating faintly through the floorboards. Richard rushed to the window. Headlights swept across the rain-dark driveway. A silver sedan accelerated toward the gate. Whose car is that? Eleanor whispered. Danielle looked at the empty doorway where Claire had been standing seconds earlier. Richard spun around. Claire was gone. On the carpet where she had stood lay her phone, its screen still illuminated. A new message from Dr. Hale filled the display. Richard picked it up. His hand began to shake. The message contained only 7 words. You were supposed to destroy Maria's letter. Lock the gates. Richard's order tore through the mansion as Claire's silver sedan vanished beyond the rain-streaked windows. The security alarm pulsed downstairs, sharp and mechanical, while Dr. Hale's message burned across Claire's abandoned phone. You were supposed to destroy Maria's letter. Richard stared at it until his knuckles whitened. Then voices rose from below. His executive team had arrived early for a private investor dinner, 12 people now standing beneath the chandelier as staff whispered and phone cameras quietly appeared. Richard's face changed. This was no longer a family crisis. It was becoming public. Nobody records anything, he snapped as he descended the stairs. Danielle followed, carrying Eleanor's notebook and the suspicious prescription bottle. Richard turned on her halfway down. And you stay out of this, Danielle stopped. Your mother is upstairs because everyone stayed out of it. Several executives looked up. Richard's cheeks flushed. You were fired tonight. Do not forget that. The words echoed through the foyer. Danielle felt every eye move toward her uniform, her worn shoes, the brass key she had surrendered less than an hour earlier. Richard lowered his voice. I have investors in this house. I will handle this. Danielle looked at Claire's phone in his hand. Like you handled me? Silence. One executive shifted uncomfortably. Richard's pride flashed into anger. Enough. Then the garage alarm screamed again. Red light strobed across the security panel. A guard called from the lower level. Sir, we have a problem. Richard rushed downstairs. The garage doors stood open to the rain. Cold fluorescent light reflected off wet concrete and polished metal. One black SUV idled near the wall, its engine vibrating unevenly. Staff crowded behind the doorway. Investors followed despite Richard ordering them back. Phone cameras were recording now. Near Claire's empty parking space sat a torn cardboard pharmacy box. Danielle crouched beside it. Do not touch that, Richard said. She stopped inches away. Look at the shipping label. Danielle. Look. Richard stepped closer. The return address was not a pharmacy. It belonged to Whitmore Medical Logistics, a distribution company inside Richard's own corporate group. His breathing caught. That is impossible. One investor spoke from behind him. Richard, your company supplied these? No. Richard turned sharply. Nobody knows what this is yet. Danielle pointed without touching the box. The lot number matches the bottle upstairs. Every face turned toward her. Richard's voice dropped. How would you know? Because I wrote it down. She opened her notebook. Same digits. Same batch. The garage seemed to shrink around him. A billionaire surrounded by executives, security, cameras, and employees, yet the only person holding a coherent timeline was the black maid he had publicly accused of stealing. This could destroy the medical division, one executive whispered. Richard spun around. There is nothing to destroy because there is no proof. Danielle stood. Then stop protecting the company long enough to protect your mother. His face hardened. You do not understand what is at stake. Danielle's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed level. I understand exactly what was at stake when she could not stand up. The words silenced the garage. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came. Then Eleanor appeared at the doorway upstairs, supported by a staff member, pale beneath the cold lights. She is right. Richard stared at his mother. You should be in bed. And Danielle should never have been thrown into the rain. A phone camera caught every word. Richard looked around at the investors, the staff, the security guards. His authority was collapsing in real time. Mom, please. Eleanor descended one careful step. You accused her because suspicion came easier than listening. Richard's expression broke. For the first time, there was no command left in his face. Only shame. Danielle lowered her eyes, unwilling to enjoy his humiliation. Then the idling SUV suddenly began beeping. A warning tone flashed from inside the cabin. Danielle turned toward it. On the passenger seat, half hidden beneath a maintenance jacket, sat a second pharmacy box. Wait. She moved closer. Richard followed. Danielle read the shipping date and went still. This was delivered 3 months ago. Eleanor whispered. 3 months? Danielle flipped through her notebook faster now. Her fingers stopped on the earliest page. Her face strained. Your symptoms started 3 months ago. Richard stared at the box. Then Claire was doing this before Maria noticed. Danielle shook her head slowly. No. Everyone waited. Rain hissed beyond the open garage door. Claire did not work here 3 months ago. Richard froze. Eleanor's hand rose to her mouth. Danielle looked toward the company logo printed across the package. Someone else started this. Claire's abandoned phone suddenly rang in Richard's hand. Dr. Hale again. This time Richard answered. Hale, where are you? Nothing but breathing came through the speaker. Then a man whispered, Richard, do not trust the woman standing next to your mother. Every eye turned toward Danielle. Richard's face emptied. Danielle did not move. And from upstairs, Eleanor whispered the one sentence that changed everything. He is not talking about Danielle. He is not talking about Danielle. Eleanor's voice barely rose above the fading hum of the SUV, yet every person in the garage heard it. Richard slowly lowered Claire's phone. Cold fluorescent light trembled across the wet concrete. Then who? Eleanor did not answer. She looked past him, toward the staff member supporting her at the doorway. Margaret Cole, Eleanor's private companion for nearly 8 years, stood perfectly still. Her white cardigan looked almost silver beneath the garage lights. Margaret's hand slipped away from Eleanor's elbow. Danielle saw it first. Mrs. Whitmore, she said quietly. Come stand beside me. Richard turned sharply. Why? Danielle did not look at him. Please. Something in her calmness stopped him from arguing. Eleanor crossed the final few feet, her steps soft against the concrete. Margaret gave a wounded smile. This is ridiculous. No one answered. The SUV engine finally shut itself off. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. Heat still rolled faintly from beneath the hood. Somewhere behind the investors, a phone vibrated once and went quiet. Richard stared at his mother. You knew? I suspected. Eleanor's eyes remained on Margaret. Maria suspected first. Margaret shook her head. Maria was confused. Danielle opened her notebook. No. She was scared. Richard looked at Danielle differently now. Not as staff. Not even as the woman he had falsely accused. He watched her like someone realizing she had been standing inside the truth while everyone else was looking past her. Danielle turned several pages. Mrs. Whitmore's symptoms started before Claire was hired. But they did not happen every night. She tapped 3 entries. Only after Margaret supervised dinner. Margaret laughed softly. You wrote down dinner schedules too? I wrote down what changed. You clean bedrooms. The old contempt returned, but it sounded weaker now. Danielle raised her eyes. And I pay attention. No one moved. Richard's throat tightened. He remembered every time Danielle had tried to speak to him in a hallway while he checked his phone. Every time he had answered without looking at her. Every time he had assumed that because her hands carried laundry, they could not also carry evidence. What else did you notice? He asked. It was the first question he had asked her all night without accusation. Danielle hesitated. That hesitation frightened him more than any answer. Your mother stopped getting sick for 4 days last month. When? Danielle turned the notebook toward him. When Margaret went to Vermont. Eleanor closed her eyes. Richard read the dates twice. Behind him, an investor slowly lowered his phone. The atmosphere had changed. Nobody was watching the black maid defend herself anymore. They were watching Danielle reconstruct what everyone with more money, education, and authority had failed to see. Margaret's face hardened. Coincidence? Danielle nodded once. Maybe. She reached toward the second pharmacy box but stopped before touching it. Then there is this. A small white inventory sticker sat beneath the shipping label. Richard crouched beside her. What am I looking at? Initials. He leaned closer. M.C. Margaret Cole. The garage went silent enough to hear rain ticking against the metal door. Margaret exhaled. I receive household deliveries. That proves nothing. She is right, Richard said quickly, almost desperately. Danielle looked at him. He wanted an innocent explanation now. Needed one. Because the alternative meant this had been happening under his roof for months while he had been too busy controlling companies to notice his own mother fading. Danielle's voice softened. Then we verify it. No triumph. No revenge. That unsettled Richard even more. Eleanor touched Danielle's arm. There is something you do not know. Danielle turned. Eleanor's eyes were wet. Maria did not disappear. Richard stepped forward. Mom? She called me 3 nights ago. Margaret's breathing changed. Just slightly. Danielle heard it. What did she say? Eleanor reached into the pocket of her robe and removed an old silver voice recorder. She told me not to trust my phone anymore. Richard stared at the device. Why did you hide this? Because I did not know who was listening. A ripple moved through the crowd. Eleanor pressed play. Static filled the garage. Then Maria's frightened voice emerged, thin but unmistakable. Mrs. Whitmore, if anything happens to me, Danielle was right about the medicine. She is the only one who noticed the pattern. Danielle's composure finally cracked. Her lips parted, but no words came. Richard looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Maria continued. The bottles are being switched inside the house. Claire helped with deliveries, but she is afraid of someone. Margaret stepped backward. One heel clicked against concrete. Richard heard it. So did everyone else. Then Maria's recording whispered, The person behind this has been beside you for years. Eleanor stopped the recorder. Nobody breathed. Richard slowly turned toward Margaret. But Danielle was staring at the security camera above the garage door. A tiny red light blinked once, then went dark. Richard, she whispered. The mansion lights flickered. Somewhere upstairs, an electronic lock clicked open. Danielle's face changed. Someone else is still inside the house. Nobody moves. Danielle's voice was quiet, but it stopped Richard before he reached the stairs. Above them, the mansion lights flickered again. The security camera stayed dark. Somewhere beyond the garage, a door closed with a soft mechanical click. Richard stared toward the house. My mother is not staying down here while someone is inside. That is exactly why she stays here, Danielle said. Richard turned, anger flashing from instinct. This is my house. Danielle met his eyes. Then start seeing what is happening inside it. Silence. The investors watched him. Staff phones remained raised. Hours earlier, Richard had ordered Danielle to empty her pockets. Now everyone waited for her next move. Danielle looked at Eleanor. When Margaret supervised dinner, who brought your water? Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Usually Margaret. And when she was away? Maria. Sometimes you. Danielle nodded. And you felt better. Margaret backed toward the interior door. A security guard stepped into her path. Richard noticed. Margaret, stay where you are. Her face tightened. You cannot seriously believe a maid over me. The word hung in the fluorescent light. Danielle did not react. She walked toward the garage security console instead. The camera went dark after Maria's recording mentioned someone inside the house. That means whoever is upstairs knows what we just heard. Richard frowned. The garage feed is internal. Exactly. Danielle pointed to the panel. Whoever shut it off did not guess. They had access. Richard looked at his security chief. Restore it. The man tapped the screen. Nothing. System is being overridden from the house. Danielle's eyes moved to Margaret. You said Claire handled deliveries. She did. But Claire only started 6 weeks ago. Margaret said nothing. Danielle continued. The medication changes started 3 months ago. Maria noticed. Then Claire arrived. Richard's breathing became heavy. What are you saying? Claire was not running this. Danielle glanced at the silver sedan's empty space. She was cleaning up after someone who already had access. Margaret laughed, but the sound broke halfway through. This is insane. Then Eleanor spoke. Show him your bracelet. Margaret froze. Every face turned. Mother? Richard whispered. Eleanor's gaze dropped to Margaret's wrist. Maria gave the household staff silver bracelets last Christmas. Everyone wore them except Danielle. Danielle understood first. Because mine broke. Eleanor nodded. Margaret's did too. Or that is what she told us. Margaret covered her wrist. Danielle stepped closer, not touching her. Beneath the cuff was a narrow electronic band. Richard's security chief went pale. That is a service access tag. Richard looked at him. Meaning? It can open restricted interior doors. A wave of whispers moved through the garage. Phone cameras lifted higher. Margaret's composure finally cracked. Richard, listen to me. He stared at the woman who had stood beside his mother for 8 years. Give me the band. You do not understand. Give it to me. Margaret slowly removed it. The security chief scanned the identification number. His eyes widened. Sir? What? This tag accessed the medication storage room 14 times in 3 months. Richard stopped breathing. Eleanor's hand found Danielle's arm. The room seemed to tilt around him. And tonight? Danielle asked. The guard checked again. 9:14. 2 minutes ago. Everyone looked toward the dark house. Margaret shook her head violently. That was not me. I have been standing here. Danielle's eyes sharpened. Then someone cloned your access. The emotional victory vanished as quickly as it arrived. There was still someone upstairs. Richard reached for his phone. Danielle stopped him with 2 words. Wait. Listen. The garage fell silent. The engine heat ticked beneath the SUV hood. Rain whispered outside. Then came a faint electronic beep from inside the mansion. Danielle counted under her breath. Another beep. 5 seconds later, another. What is that? Richard asked. Danielle's face changed. Your mother's medication dispenser. Eleanor looked confused. But it is upstairs. Exactly. Danielle moved to the security monitor. Someone activated it remotely. Richard's security chief restored one camera. Grainy black and white footage appeared. A shadow crossed the upstairs hallway. Then another camera returned. The medication room door stood open. Richard's face collapsed. Zoom in. The image sharpened. A man in a dark overcoat stepped into view carrying a medical case. Eleanor gasped. Richard whispered, Hale. Dr. Marcus Hale looked directly toward the camera, as if he knew it had returned. Then he opened the case. Inside were rows of identical amber bottles. The investors erupted in whispers. Richard stared at Danielle. Everything she had recorded, every warning he had dismissed, was unfolding in front of the people whose respect had once mattered more to him than her voice. You knew, he whispered. Danielle shook her head. I noticed. That answer broke something in him. Richard looked down at the marble dust on Danielle's worn shoes, then at the phones recording his silence. I called you a thief. Danielle said nothing. I threw you out into the rain. Still nothing. His voice cracked. And you came back to save my mother. Eleanor's eyes filled. Around them, the same staff who had watched Danielle empty her pockets now looked at her with stunned respect. Then the monitor beeped. Hale had disappeared from the hallway. A second camera came online inside Richard's private office. The safe door was open. Hale stood before it holding a thick folder stamped Whitmore Medical Logistics. Richard went white. Danielle leaned toward the screen. Hale removed one document, looked toward the camera, and smiled. Then Richard's phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared. Ask your mother why your signature is on every order. Richard slowly turned toward Eleanor. Her face had gone completely still. Richard looked at his mother, as if the floor had shifted beneath him. My signature? The restored monitor cast a cold blue glow across Eleanor's face while Dr. Hale disappeared from Richard's office carrying the Whitmore Medical Logistics file. Eleanor's fingers tightened around Danielle's arm. I never said you signed those orders. Richard swallowed. The message did. Danielle stepped toward the monitor. Then that is what Hale wants you thinking about. Every eye turned to her. No one interrupted this time. The garage had become almost silent, the cooling SUV ticking softly beneath fluorescent lights. He wants Richard ashamed and confused. Danielle continued. Because confused people stop checking details. Richard stared at her. Hours earlier, he had treated her explanations like excuses. Now his investors, security team, staff, and mother were waiting for the maid he had fired to explain what the billionaire had missed. Danielle pointed to the company document visible on the monitor. You approved medical division purchases electronically, correct? Richard nodded. Hundreds every month. Then your signature could have been attached to legitimate orders before someone changed what those orders contained. One investor stepped closer. Meaning the records could make Richard look responsible. Or careless, Danielle said. Richard flinched at the word. She did not soften it. Call corporate compliance. Freeze every shipment connected to those lot numbers. Preserve the access logs. Do not delete anything. Richard immediately looked at his chief of security. Do it. The man moved. No hesitation. No question. Danielle noticed the reversal before Richard did. For the first time that night, her voice had become the one people acted on. Margaret sank onto a bench near the wall. Claire knew Hale was using the company system, she whispered. Richard turned. You knew too. Margaret's eyes filled. I knew something was wrong. I did not know how far it went. Eleanor's expression hardened. Maria knew enough to be afraid. Margaret lowered her head. Hale told Claire that if anyone questioned the deliveries, staff would lose their jobs. Then he showed us documents with Richard's authorization. Richard looked sick. And nobody came to me? Danielle's gaze met his. The answer was already between them. People had tried. He simply had not created a world where everyone believed they would be heard. His eyes dropped to Danielle's uniform. You came to me. Twice. The word was quiet. Richard closed his eyes. Around them, phones were still recording, but he no longer seemed to care. And I dismissed you. Danielle said nothing. Then when the necklace disappeared, I did not investigate. His voice grew rough. I looked at you and decided what kind of person you were. Eleanor watched her son carefully. Richard turned toward the staff gathered behind him. Several had witnessed Danielle empty her pockets. Some had looked away. Others had believed him because he was Richard Whitmore. I accused an innocent woman in front of all of you, he said. No executive polish remained in his voice. I was wrong. Danielle's eyes flickered. Richard faced her fully. And what I said to you was worse than wrong. The garage held its breath. I made your race part of my suspicion. I humiliated you because my prejudice made an accusation feel like proof. One staff member slowly lowered her phone. Another looked at Danielle with wet eyes. Richard continued, quieter now. You protected my mother while I protected my pride. Danielle's throat tightened, but she remained still. He reached into his pocket and removed the employee key Danielle had placed on the marble table earlier. He had picked it up before coming downstairs. Richard held it toward her. Come back. Name your salary. Name your position. Danielle looked at the key but did not take it. A few people exchanged startled glances. Richard's hand remained suspended between them. I am sorry, he whispered. Danielle finally spoke. An apology is not a contract, Mr. Whitmore. His face fell. And respect should not arrive only after you discover I was useful. Eleanor closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Richard lowered the key. Danielle stepped closer, not cruel, not triumphant. If you want to make this right, start with Maria. Find her. Protect every employee who tried to speak. Find out how Hale used your company. Then make sure the next person wearing my uniform does not need a notebook full of evidence before you believe her. Richard nodded once. It was not the nod of a billionaire granting permission. It was the nod of a man receiving instructions he had earned the right to hear. Behind him, one investor began to clap, then stopped when Danielle looked over. She did not want applause. She wanted action. Richard understood. He turned to security. Call the authorities. Preserve every recording. Find Maria. Then Eleanor reached for Danielle's hand. There is one more thing. Danielle looked down. Eleanor's voice trembled. The necklace. Richard went still. Eleanor opened the velvet pouch and lifted the diamonds that had started everything. I did not simply move it. Richard frowned. What do you mean? Eleanor looked at Danielle, then at her son. I hid it before dinner because I was afraid someone was searching my room. The remaining warmth disappeared from Richard's face. You knew someone was coming? Eleanor nodded. And I knew Danielle would be blamed if anything vanished. Danielle's eyes widened. Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor squeezed her hand. That is why I left something else inside the safe. Richard's breathing stopped. What? Eleanor looked toward the dark mansion. The security monitor flickered back to Richard's office. Hale was gone. The open safe stood empty. Eleanor whispered, The evidence Maria gave me. Danielle turned toward Richard. Neither spoke. The room that had finally learned to believe her fell silent again. By sunrise, the engines were cold, the alarms were silent, and nobody in the Whitmore garage was recording anymore. Richard stood beneath the fading fluorescent lights with Eleanor beside him and Danielle several feet away, still wearing the same black uniform he had judged hours earlier. The missing evidence had not vanished with Hale. Security recovered a backup from Eleanor's recorder, and Maria was found safe before dawn at her sister's home outside Baltimore. Her statement, the access logs, the altered medication records, and the preserved company files were turned over to investigators. Claire agreed to cooperate. Margaret did too. Hale could no longer hide behind Richard's name. Yet Richard barely looked at the documents now. He looked at Danielle. I spent years believing money made me difficult to deceive. His voice was low. It only made me easier to flatter. Danielle said nothing. Morning light slipped through the open garage door, turning rainwater on the driveway pale gold. Richard took the brass employee key from his pocket again. This time, he did not offer it to her. He placed it carefully on the workbench between them. I should never have asked you to prove you belonged here. Danielle looked at the key. You should never have asked me to prove I was innocent because I worked here. Richard lowered his eyes. You are right. No defense. No qualification. Eleanor watched her son absorb the words instead of fighting them. Richard turned toward the remaining staff. Danielle Brooks was falsely accused in this house. By me. The employees stood quietly beneath the cold lights. Her race and her position affected how quickly I believed the accusation. That was prejudice. It was mine. She will not carry the shame for it. Danielle's expression softened, but only slightly. The apology mattered. It did not erase the rain. Richard understood that now. He looked toward his security chief. Every accusation involving staff gets documented and independently reviewed from today forward. No exceptions. And anyone who raises a safety concern gets heard before rank decides whether their voice matters. Danielle finally met his eyes. That is a beginning. Richard nodded. Not forgiveness. No, I understand. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and removed the diamond necklace. The stones caught the first sunlight and scattered tiny reflections across the concrete. She walked toward Danielle. Would you help me? Danielle hesitated, then smiled faintly. Eleanor turned around. Danielle lifted the necklace and fastened it gently behind her neck. The same diamonds that had made Danielle look guilty hours earlier now rested beneath her hands without a single suspicious glance in the room. Richard watched in silence. Something in his face gave way. Not humiliation anymore. Recognition. Eleanor touched the necklace, then reached back for Danielle's hand. Come upstairs for breakfast. Danielle glanced toward the driveway. Her bus would arrive in 20 minutes. Her coat was still damp. Her employment status was still unresolved. Richard stepped forward, then stopped several feet away. He did not command. Danielle. She looked at him. I would like you to return, he said. Not because you saved us. Because you deserved respect before you ever had to. Danielle studied him for a long moment. I will think about it. A billionaire who once expected immediate obedience simply nodded. Take all the time you need. 3 weeks later, sunlight filled the Whitmore foyer differently. The house was quieter. Eleanor's medication now arrived through an independent pharmacy, sealed and logged. Maria had returned only once, not to work, but to sit with Eleanor over coffee and finally tell her story without fear. Richard's company had opened an external investigation into the medical division. Danielle had not returned as a maid. She had accepted a new position overseeing household care and employee advocacy, with authority written into the contract and boundaries she had chosen herself. That morning, Richard approached Eleanor's room carrying coffee. He reached the doorway and stopped. Danielle sat beside the window reviewing a care schedule, while Eleanor laughed at something she had said. Richard raised his hand toward the door, then paused. Months ago, he would have walked straight in. Instead, he knocked. Danielle looked up. Their eyes met across the warm room. Richard waited. No billionaire. No maid. Just a man asking permission from a woman he had once refused to hear. Danielle gave one small nod. Richard entered and placed the coffee on the table. Eleanor smiled but said nothing. Outside, morning light stretched across the marble floor to the place where Danielle had once been ordered to empty her pockets. Her old brass key rested inside a small glass frame near the staff entrance now, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Beneath it were 6 simple words. Listen before you decide who someone is. Danielle passed the frame on her way down the hall. She did not stop to look at it. She did not need to. Behind her, Richard held the door open for an employee carrying fresh linens. The woman thanked him and walked through. Richard waited until she passed before letting the door close. Danielle heard the soft click, glanced back once, and kept walking into the morning light.